Good evening, everyone. President Hayes said that he would be a little late, so we will get started a couple of minutes after 7 o'clock. We have a budget hearing this evening. Those councilors in attendance tonight: Councilor DiMartino, Councilor Tran, Councilor Caddy, Councilor DiNatale, Councilor Joseph, welcome back, Councilor Salamito, Councilor Starr, Councilor Connery. Tonight we'll begin with the Public Works Department, and we'll go to page 25 in your budget books. The total is $2,493,661. Labor, Administration, and Engineering, $270,877. Expense, Administration, and Engineering, $3,500. Labor, Animal Control, $40,925. Expense, Animal Control, $10,000. Labor, Cemetery, $111,538. Expense, Cemetery, $30,600. Labor, Highway, $690,598. Expense, Highway Services and Supplies, $442,142. Expense, Highway Maintenance and Repair, $289,480. Total Snow and Ice, $400,000. Labor, Parks, $159,451, and expense Parks, $44,550. And we welcome Mr. Lenny Laxo. Lenny?
Okay, thank you. Councilors, it's been an interesting and a challenging time since I joined the DPW in November, and I'd like to thank the DPW employees, some of whom are here tonight, for all of their hard work and cooperation in successfully opening the roads and removing debris after the ice storm, for implementing the streetlight shut-off program, for engaging the community with a successful DPW day, and for showing leadership and sacrifice by being the first of the unions to vote to accept a wage cut due to the city's financial problems. The DPW is a fraction of the size that it used to be, but we did our best to handle all of these issues on top of the routine workload. I'd also like to recognize our two deputy commissioners, Dennis Mernier of the Water Division and Joe Jordan of the Wastewater and Sewer Division, for the long hours they put in to keep those two important services running smoothly for our residents. They will review the enterprise funds with you separately. The fiscal year 2010 budget presents a number of challenges to the DPW. Although the total budget was cut 14%, the good news is that we did not have to lay off any employees. However, last year's budget funded 37 full-time equivalent positions, but the FY10 budget brings us down to 32.5 positions. We are avoiding layoffs through attrition, but it will be difficult to maintain our level of service with the reduction in manpower. Our true workforce is actually smaller than it appears, as one position is taken by the addition of the Animal Control Officer to our budget, and also $95,000, or 16% of our budget, for personal services in the Streets Division for operators and foremen has to be dedicated to CDBG-R projects. It is certainly a plus that we're able to save the equivalent of about 2.5 positions with the CDBG-R funding, but we need to keep in mind that those hours will be unavailable for normal DPW services during the coming fiscal year. Therefore, in the Streets Division, we are in effect down to an average of 12.5 workers out in the field. On the expense side, the cuts will have an impact on our residents, most notably in the street lighting budget. The budget will be reduced to $200,000, which is the cost of the street lights that remain on after shutting off 60% of them this spring. We're actively looking at new street lighting systems with Unitil that will be less expensive to run, such as induction lamps and LED lighting. Unitil will be here on Friday to look at locations for trials. To help ease the burden on the remaining DPW workers, we plan to transfer maintenance and monitoring of the sewer collection system to the Wastewater and Sewer Division. This is similar to the arrangement where the Water Division is responsible for the water distribution system, and it is how most other municipalities have this organized. There are a number of reasons to do this. First, the EPA and DEP hold the Wastewater and Sewer Division responsible for the collection system, so they should also have control over it. Also, the council passed an ordinance last year which combines the sewer system with wastewater. Also, the DPW does not have the manpower to perform the mandated inspections of the sewer system, and only half of the required inspections are usually done. We will be fined by DEP if we continue this practice. And currently, the DPW is only able to react to problems such as sewer backups, and we cannot perform the maintenance needed to prevent problems from occurring in the first place. For example, just last week, a resident reminded us that it would be good practice to flush out the line on his street on a periodic basis. Unfortunately, the heavy rains over the weekend caused a backup into his basement before we could even think about performing preventive maintenance. This will be further discussed by Joe Jordan when he reviews the wastewater budget. So that's my statement. Do you have any questions on the budget?
Questions for Mr. Manilaxo? Councilor Caddy.
How much monies were transferred from CDGB to your department?
It'll be $95,000 in fiscal year 10.
And that was 2.5 positions?
It's the equivalent of 2.5.
What are the projects that they'll be performing?
It's completing the fence project along Rollstone Street next to the cemetery. There'll be sidewalks on Elm Street and a trail at the new Gateway Park.
When we, 2 years ago, when we were discussing Rollstone Street, one of the dilemmas was that Fitchburg Gas and Electric had their telephone poles in the middle of the sidewalk, making the passage between the fence and the pole too small. The idea was to have the poles moved. It was later decided that it was cheaper to move the fence back than to move the poles. Did Unitil share in any of this cost to move the fence back and repave the sidewalk?
That's all being done through CDBG funds.
So they didn't share it in
No, they
costs?
didn't.
Have they been contacted or asked to share in some of the costs?
Not since I've been here. I don't know if they were.
Is this the
before
first you
that.
heard of it?
Right.
All right, well, I guess Mr. Munya could probably fill you in, but we discussed that probably 3 or 4 times in our DPW meetings. There would have been a great cost to Unitil to move those telephone poles. It seems to me we let them off the hook. I mean, they should have been responsible for some of that project, even though it's CDGB money. That could be used to do something more somewhere else.
Yeah, those poles, I think they're actually Verizon poles, although Unitil has
Yeah.
wires on them. And
I
they
still-
They did have to help us out with relocating the guys because they were interfering with the fence.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's too late, I don't know, but I thought we were all on the same page with it, that they would at least pay something because of the savings that they would have by not moving the poles.
Yeah, we can look into it.
All right, thank you.
Councilor DiMartino.
Welcome. 34 and a half people work at your, that's what you have for Public Works?
Yeah, it will be 32 and a half fiscal year 10.
How can you possibly run the department with that amount of people? I mean, that is, say one gets sick, some are getting vacations this time of the year. How is it possible to do the work that you are doing with that amount of people?
No, it's not easy, that's for sure. You know, the department's just a fraction of the size that it used to be, and you're right, during the summer, especially on Mondays and Fridays, people get their time off, so we really have a skeleton crew during those periods, you know, with just a handful of people at times.
Have you any plans to buy some new equipment this year, or are you asking us for something this year?
Well, we definitely need a new street sweeper. We could probably use Chapter 90 funds for that. Also, one of our loaders requires about $50,000 worth of work, so we have to think about that also, you know, whether we buy a used one or a new one, but that's another big ticket item that is definitely needed. It's one of our workhorses when we're plowing snow up in the country over the winter.
Of all of the departments, you are the lowest as regards manpower and for the amount of work that you do. So first of all, we must congratulate the people that work there, because they're certainly doing more with less.
That's for sure.
The only thing is that after a while, that gets tiring to them, that they keep taking the brunt. When there's money to be transferred, let's transfer it here, let's transfer it out of there. And you're definitely understaffed. And I want to ask you about, again, I think I asked you the other night, about the summer help for the Parks Department. There's only one person hired this year?
Well, this spring, we've had one in the, there was one in the cemetery. We were hoping to hire two, but we were advised by Human Resources that we shouldn't hire one because there was it was likely that she'd be filing for unemployment afterwards, after the job was done. So we only brought on the one retiree instead.
And they found out that that's not true?
Yeah, I haven't heard that.
That has been found out that that is not true. And therefore, I'd like you, if you could follow up on that, please. Thank you very much.
Councilor Di Natale.
Thank you. Shockingly, I have a lot to say. My first comment is regarding a recommendation for a cut in the department that I would like to make tonight. And I'm going over, Mr. Laxo, the organizational structure of the DPW. And correct me if I'm wrong here. We've got the commissioner, which is yourself. And I'm excluding water and wastewater. We got the commissioner, which is you. We have the superintendent of streets, which is basically the person in charge, the positions in charge of, no, we have the superintendent of streets, none of that. We have working foremen,
Yes.
who then have the crews below them. How many working foremen do we have between the cemetery, parks, and the highway department?
We have 5 in streets, plus 1 each in cemetery and parks.
So we have 7 foremen. How many men are under the streets, cemetery, and parks combined? How many total guys, full-time?
Let's see. I'd say roughly 25 or so.
And that includes the 7?
Right.
Okay, so we have the commissioner, the superintendent of the streets, then the 7 foremen, and then the crews below that, so 18 men among those 3 areas, streets, parks, and cemetery. Okay. My attention is focused on the superintendent of streets position. And correct me if I'm wrong here, I'm trying to understand the job that's involved here. The superintendent of the streets duties, he's the head supervisor of all the crews in the DPW. He meets with the foreman every morning and gives them assigned daily tasks and basically directs the crews from one job to another and coordinates the deployment.
Right.
My question to you is, I don't understand why, I'm thinking to myself, with the staffing that you have, and I know you have a lot of responsibilities, but it's under the guise of doing more with less. If there is not a possibility that either yourself or one of the 7 foremen be designated as a lead supervisor, and they hand out the daily tasks, and they still go out there and work, but they also are in charge of periodically supervising the crews. I'm bringing this up because I consider the position, especially in these times, to be a middle management position. I don't see why, and you may disagree with me, and that's fine, but I don't see, I'm looking at this from a criticality standpoint. If we do not have the superintendent of streets position, can the 7 foremen and the 18 men below those 7 foremen, can they still do their jobs? I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but my opinion is, I believe they're more than capable of doing the work by having one of those 7 foremen be a lead supervisor, if you will, and not having another management position. And again, I want to stress here, this is about the position. So I don't really want to get into personalities or the person who we're referring to here. It has nothing to do with that. It's about redirecting $70,000 elsewhere. And you're probably going to disagree with my opinion on that, but I don't see why it's not feasible, because to me, I see to myself, if we don't have the superintendent of the streets, is the DPW not going to be able to function? I think that's a very easy way to put it, but I don't think the answer is no, it won't be able to function. I believe there's a way we can work around that. Whether that 70 grand can fund 2 more DPW workers for the streets, or police or fire, if that was the mayor's prerogative. I look at the structure of the DPW, and I don't see why one of those 7 foremen can't take on a more expansive role and still have the job done. Daily assignments, periodic supervision, someone calls this lead foreman, he calls whatever crew is, and they move it. In these tough times, I don't see, I totally can see this department being run without that position. And what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, actually, the superintendent of streets is, one of the most valuable, if not the most valuable positions in the department. I mean, he is in charge of, streets, cemetery, as well as parks. That person needs to, call in all the crews in the middle of the night during a snowstorm, and, keep track of, all the different activities. There's paperwork involved. It's not just going around and, handing out assignments. He has to track what everybody is doing, make sure everybody has all the materials and parts that they need, whether it's out in the field or in the garage. So there is a lot to it.
Is it not possible that we could have one of the foremen take on an expanded role?
Well,
I'm just trying to...
one person has to do that, but I don't think one person could be both the superintendent of streets and
I'm not really saying be the superintendent of the streets. I guess I'm trying to not only understand what the position does, but what would happen if we didn't have it. And I really cannot see how these guys can't do their daily tasks without it. I still think they're more than capable of doing it. And the 7 foremen, this is an organizational issue. I know it's not clear cut and dry, but I really I'm strongly in the belief that we can go without this position and put more responsibility on the foremen, who are directly in charge of the crews. And that would take a little more planning and work, but we're decimating other departments, and yours, as you pointed out, is stretched thin as well. And, we need more ground guys. My other point with this is, we have 3 cemetery and 4 parks employees, correct?
yes. Mm-hmm.
And when I'm driving around the city during the day, every now and then, I see that we've got 1 or 2 guys in one cemetery, 1 or 2 at another, 1 or 2 at a park, and I don't understand why these 7 men can't be combined to go to one cemetery for 2 or 3 days, knock that off, then go to the next cemetery, then go to the next park, and then repeat the process. I understand these guys are doing cold patch, and they're doing catch basins as well, but I see 7 men in charge of grounds, and they're all sporadically spread out. I've seen it. So I don't know why they're not consolidated, and they're not knocking off one section at a time. That's just an observation I have, but I am of the opinion, from an organizational perspective, and we can agree to disagree, that I believe the DPW can function. I have the utmost confidence in yourself and your men that they can do the job every day without that position in these tough times, and it's about the position. So I'm going to make the recommendation, and again, it's up to this council if they want to go along with it when we discuss it at the end. I want to make a recommendation that we reduce the superintendent of the streets line item from $68,407 down to Sorry. I'd like to reduce it by $58,407, leaving $10,000 in there, because I understand that since this wasn't planned, if the council were to go along with this, we would have to give the individual ample time and ample notice. So I believe $10,000 would be close to enough to fund that position for a month and a half to 2 months after the budget is passed. Again, this isn't etched in stone, but I believe the men are more than capable of doing the job without the position. And lastly, I also would like to make a recommendation, and this is on a separate budget, but it's pertinent to the DPW, is the mechanic in the police department. I would like to have that position reduced. I don't know the line item or how much that position is funded at, but I want to leave just enough in there to keep that position 6 to 8 weeks employed after the 1st of July. And my reason for that is you have 3 mechanics in the garage, and I know they do a lot of work, and they do great work. I am aware that the police department, when their cruisers are in bad shape or they need major restoration, they get shipped to Marlboro. So the mechanic at the police station does minor work, oil changes, chain replacements, tire replacements. And it's been a prerogative of mine to consolidate mechanic services, because we have 5 mechanics total. And based on the fact that we send most of our body work to Marlboro, I think that the DPW garage mechanics can also handle the workload of every now and then fixing minor issues with police cruisers. And we'll save $40,000 from that position, and there's another cop. So those are my 2 recommendations. And Mr. Laxell, you're free to comment if you'd like. Looking at it from an organizational standpoint, I guess it's based on my confidence in you as a leader and in your men that they can do the job without that middle management position. Thank you.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Lenny.
As far as the superintendent of streets goes, I think it's really necessary to retain that position. We need one individual to be in charge of, all of the foremen and their crews, among streets, parks, and cemeteries, and have the ability to, shift resources around as required, as well as all the time it takes to order parts, materials, and do all the tracking that's required to have everything properly coordinated and everything in the right place at the right time. So I think that's a really important position. As far as shifting some of the police mechanical work to the DPW garage, we had 4 people in the DPW garage about a year ago. Now we're down to 3. They're really stretched thin, keeping the DPW equipment going, much of which is aging equipment, and I'm not sure how many vehicles the police have or what their workload is, but I'm not sure that our guys could handle the extra work. I'd have to look into that.
Mr. Vice President, these are just recommendations. Nothing's etched in stone. I'm putting it all on the table, and I'm letting my position be known. And I appreciate your input, and it's noted for me personally. Thank you.
Just want to make note that Council President Hay is here, and Mayor Wong has joined us. This question is Councilor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Councilor Di Natale just brought up a point that I wanted to mention. He covered a lot of the bases. I, too, believe that you have people within your department, foremen and other workers, to handle the workload that was previously assigned to the superintendent of streets. A couple months ago, you gave us a packet. It was every single petition that had been filed within Public Works from 2000 on. one of the things that I noticed as I was going through and finding all the issues that affected Ward 4 was the number. I'm the third counselor in the last 3 terms. I found several petitions that I had submitted that were submitted each by the by the previous 2 counselors. We're talking about trees, we're talking about berms, we're talking about some drainage issues. None of those have been completed. And the one constant that existed throughout that entire time was the superintendent of streets. And I never really got any solid answers. I'd asked for such a packet about a year ago. I received something that maybe the prior 18 months, and that was it. Thanks to you, I was able to look back much further and do a little more research as to some of the history of the petitions and the issues that other counselors had dealt with in the past. I just don't see the need for this position. I'm not one to tell anybody how to do their job. And I, like Councilor Natale said, I will agree to disagree with you. I've had a couple issues in the past. They weren't important then, but I said to myself I was going to sit and wait and find out how some of my other peers felt about it. During the ice storm on Saturday, the first day and a half after the ice storm, Mayor Wong asked how we were set for workers for DPW. The superintendent of streets informed that we were okay. We didn't need anybody. Former President Connery was the first person to pick his jar up off the floor and said, "Excuse me, we need all the help we can get." 3 days after that, it was Monday. I remember it was a nice day. First time I had seen my daughter in about 3 days, and I had run into him, the superintendent of streets out on Ashburnham Hill Road, investigating whether a street had been plowed. I'd asked you previously 2 days earlier if a plow could get up on Ashby West Road, knowing that you would have delegated that to the superintendent of streets. Well, 2 days after the fact, nothing was done, and the road still looked kind of like something out of a science fiction movie. At that point, I had seen him up there in his truck with a passenger I don't think worked for the city of Fitchburg. I didn't recognize him at all. And I simply asked if you had a chance, could you please go down and plow Ashby West Road? I can't repeat what was said to me in this forum from the superintendent of streets. I look around this room, and with the exception of one counselor, I see parents. I can only imagine what each individual here would think or do if they were spoken to that way by anybody in front of their child, much less as a city councilor being spoken to that way, not only in front of your child, but in front of other constituents. Needless to say, I had steam coming out of my ears. I'd spoken with you. I'd spoken with a couple other counselors. Some counselors are probably hearing this for the first time. The fact is, my issue wasn't important then. The task at hand was important. And I decided I was going to let it go. And I was going to wait until budget time. Because I had my suspicions before, and now they were confirmed. I know Mayor Wong has spent a lot of time going through this budget. But without the elimination of this position, I would have very strong reservations. And I'm not going to say this about really anything else, but I have very strong reservations about voting for the budget. The situation that I dealt with was unexcusable. I confronted the individual. I believe you were there. And I let it go. Because I needed to get that off my chest. I'm not convinced, any way, shape, or form, that this position is necessary in this city. With the foreman, with the experience that your foremen have, I also have other suspicions that the superintendent of streets hasn't exactly been living up to the tasks that he's assigned, because I don't believe that there's any reason that some of the workers should be going to get their assignments from dispatchers. I don't believe that there's any reason that people have to wait 3, 4, 5 hours from a response when they need a particular material or whatnot. Therefore, I agree 100% with Councilor Di Natale, and I would like to see that position eliminated from our operating budget for fiscal year 2010. Thank you.
Counselor Tran.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Commissioner, how much do we currently have in the streetlights account?
You mean in fiscal year 10 or 09?
09. We have about a
think
week
you're-
and a half left in this fiscal year, so how much do we have
Yes.
left?
We have, by the time we pay the bills, we'll be just about at zero at the end of the fiscal year.
Okay, because I have the year-to-date budget ending May, and we had 51,000 left, close to 52. So you're saying that we're going to spend about $52,000 for just June?
Yeah, well, that's a little deceiving because I held back on paying bills in the month of May until we got all the credits resolved for all the streetlights that we turned off. So you don't see the May bills in there. So that's why it appears that we had more money than we really did. But now, since then, I've gotten the information we need from Unitil and Direct Energy to be comfortable with the bills.
Okay. You mentioned that we have 7 foremans, right? Is that correct?
Yes. Mhm.
And at every job site, we have a foreman,
That's right.
and we can refer these foremen as supervisors, correct? These are experts. They're experts at what they do.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So why couldn't these foremen communicate with each other rather than having a middleman, which we call the superintendent of streets, to be, in order for them to communicate?
Yeah. I mean, there's no question that the foreman could communicate with each other. We still need somebody minding the store and taking care of all the materials and those sorts of things. And the other issue is the foreman and their workers are all part of the same union, and it puts the foreman in an awkward situation if they're in charge of discipline, of their fellow union brothers.
So basically, the job description that I'm hearing from you is the superintendent of street serves as a dictator. He dictates roles and duties to the foreman. Is that correct? Basically.
I mean, that's his responsibility, is to assign all those, whether I'd call him a dictator or not, I don't know, but...
So why can't these responsibilities be held by you? Is there anything that he can do that you can't do?
Well, it's just a matter of there only being so many hours in a day. I mean, the superintendent of streets is more than a full-time job in itself.
Does he perform any hands-on work?
No, not usually.
Does he visit the sites and contribute in any other way other than providing communication?
I mean, he does visit the sites. He helps them with technical issues that might come up. If they need something, he'll make sure that they get it.
How often are these technical issues that the foremen can't handle themselves?
I mean, it comes up occasionally, not every day, sure.
You know that your group, and I'll repeat what Councilor DiMartino mentioned, that your group is a small group, and it's vital that your group is healthy and have the appropriate number of manpower to serve this city, the size of the city that we have. Wouldn't it be beneficial to the DPW department as well as the city to allocate the amount of money that we pay for this salary in order to increase the manpower?
I mean, there's no question that we need the manpower, but at the same time, we need the supervision. I mean, somebody has to be in charge.
And we have no confidence in the foreman to provide the supervision that you're talking about?
I mean, our foremen are capable of supervising their crews, but when it comes to, allocating resources among crews, for example, somebody has to have the final say on that. You can't have, 5 chiefs. One of them has to be able to make the final decision on, who gets what people or what equipment or what materials.
And the commissioner can make that final decision, which is you.
I could. I mean,
Okay.
it's just that we really need somebody there full-time all the time to take care of those things. If I'm in a meeting or working on a report or whatever, I'm not over there, trying to resolve those issues that can come up at any moment.
I'm done for now. Thank you.
Councilor Solomito.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Thank you, Mr. Lacto. I'm taking a little break from that one avenue of questioning. 99% of all the calls I get since I've been on the council are potholes. Potholes, potholes, and potholes. When I came on, I was told that the DPW had a special truck or machinery that could fill potholes at a quicker period of time. For some reason, that's no longer in operation. I don't know anything about that vehicle. Could you explain that?
Yeah, we do have the machine. I mean, the machine was purchased several years back. I'm not sure exactly when. It needs liquid asphalt. When they purchased the machine, they didn't have the tank to store the asphalt. So, at a later date, they purchased the tank. And then the other thing you need is the liquid asphalt material itself to be stored in the tank and fed into the truck each day. And I think the problem the last year or two was just affording the liquid asphalt to use in the truck. So when I was putting the budget together, I made sure that we'll have enough funds in there for the liquid asphalt so that we can utilize that equipment, since we have about $100,000 invested in it.
So it's a fairly new truck then.
Yes.
When do you hope to have that in operation, even an estimate?
I mean, during the next fiscal year, we should certainly be using it.
About probably this coming summer, hopefully? Hopefully?
Yes. I mean, now we can get hot patch, but during the winter especially is when that truck would be valuable, when we've been using cold patch to take care of bad potholes, but that stuff doesn't last very long. But this machine, can use a hot mix that'll be much more durable than cold patch, so that's the advantage of it, especially during the winter months.
Thank you. The number 2 issue that I get a call from is sweepers. And I know that we had 3, and then we were down to 1, and 1 was basically being used for parts. Could you explain how many we have in operation now?
There are 2. There were 4 in the department. 2 of them are basically junks now. There's some people interested in purchasing those for spare parts, so we'll look into that. so we can get some money back. But the other two are up and running now. One of them, early in the spring, we required over $15,000 in parts alone to get it running.
Do you think 2 is enough?
Well, 3 would certainly be better, but if we buy a new one, then we'll have, one good one and 2 backups.
Now, you said that it took approximately $15,000 to get that repaired. Was that done outside or in-house? Do you remember?
In-house.
So going back to the question of Councilor Di Natale, our own mechanics were working on that, correct?
That's right.
So that if we were to bring in cruisers to be worked on, safe to assume that working on that truck might be delayed or something like that? I'm just afraid if we take on too many vehicles in there, something's going to be delayed. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, something would have to give unless they start working overtime.
A few more items. When they talked about other departments and the benefits that they have, an issue that came up, I know with the fire department anyway, was a pager stipend. And I know that in your department it's about $23,000. How many employees get that stipend?
It's 2 at a time. So every night and every weekend, we have people on pager to respond to emergency calls.
So while they're home, they get is it an overtime cost, or they get,
Well, they get the stipend for carrying the pager, and then if they're called in, they get overtime.
okay. And does every employee, I mean, it goes on a rotating basis, is that what happens?
Yes.
How much money would you estimate that each employee gets per year?
For the pager stipend,
If it's a $23,000 total budget item?
I don't know, maybe $1,000 or so.
And the last question, I don't mean to take a lot of time, is the outside contractors that we use for snow plowing, how much would you estimate that we paid? And I know last year was very difficult with the ice storm, but how much would you estimate that we pay for outside contractors?
Yeah, I don't have the snow and ice sheet in front of me, but it was several $100,000.
Have you ever determined if it would be, I imagine you have analyzed it, it would be cheaper to pay our men overtime as compared to outside contractors?
Well, we have 15 of our own plows, and then we usually call in about 40 private contractors, so we don't have enough equipment to support that.
And do you know how much money was saved on turning off the street lights from approximately April until the end of this fiscal year, would you estimate?
Well, if we left all the streetlights on, the total bill would have been about $465,000
For that 3-month period? No, I mean...
for the entire
3-month
fiscal year.
Okay. For the 3-month period from April when they went off, is that approximately when they went off, Mayor? Until the end of June, how much do you think we saved? Or could the mayor answer that? I'm not...
465 minus, what's the total bill once we pay May and June?
About 380 or something like that.
So 80,000.
So the savings you would hope to be for the 4 quarters naturally would be...
300,000
Okay. Is that what you estimated, any
Yes.
savings?
for next year, saving 300,000.
Thank you. That's all the questions.
Councilor Joseph.
I guess my main concern about the discussion that we've had this evening is, up until now, Councilor Di Natale has, or councilors have said where money traditionally hadn't been spent in the budget, and it was brought that the overtime account traditionally ran over $500,000, and so we were going to cut out $300,000, and I can understand that line of reasoning. But when you go after a position that one deems to be inappropriate, that's, I think, a whole different conversation and a whole different way of looking at what you've been asking us to look at. there's no savings there with cutting out a $68,000 person, because that person has been spending $68,000 every year. So I don't get how we went from looking at cost overruns to a specific person in the budget. Sounds like a witch hunt. Mr. Laxo has a budget in different categories of $20 million. Okay, he has a $10 million wastewater, a $5 million water, $3 million Parks Public Works Department, and a couple of $100,000 for the engineering and things like that. So he has a $20 million budget that he's responsible for. And basically what we've said is, we have a person that runs the water department, we have a person that runs the wastewater department, and we have a person that runs the streets, parks, and cemetery division for $3 million. And that Mr. Laxo should take on the responsibility, I believe that was a suggestion of one of the counselors, of overseeing that department. The only analogy I can bring to it is my own restaurant. Okay, I have 1 out of 16 restaurants that are within the corporate structure. The person that is up at the top, the president of the company, has 16 places to worry about, equivalent to Mr. Laxo. I have, within my department, I have front managers, I have kitchen managers, and to say that my front managers or my kitchen managers are not competent to be able to oversee their divisions, then they wouldn't be working for me. I feel that the foremans are very capable of looking over their divisions. But as the store manager, I have to be responsible for everything that happens within that store. If to say that we could just have the kitchen manager run his kitchen and the front manager run the front and nobody run the restaurant, it would be people running around in circles thinking that their part is the most important part of the job, so that's the only part that should be funded or should have somebody doing something. So I just don't get it. You're taking a management style and a management philosophy and bringing it basically down to a level that makes it very small level, and I think that the person that is in charge of the superintendent of the streets is a very important job. He runs a $3 million division of the city, and to say that the 7 people under him could actually do that, you'd have everybody running around doing their own thing and nobody coordinating the jobs. And then to say that Mr. Laxo should be the one doing that position, who's going to oversee the rest of the $20 million operation. So I guess, to me, to have a suggestion that you can cut out the $68,000, if it was some money that we weren't spending up until now, I could fully understand that. But now we're talking about cutting out a position, so I don't get the cost savings. Thank you.
Councilor Conry.
I had a couple of observations and a couple of questions. First of all, Mr. Laxo, you came in at a very difficult time. It's an understatement. I think you've done a fine job. I especially like some recent correspondence from you setting some policies which we have never had before. I think that is to your credit, and I hope that it continues, and I would hope that other department heads would pick up the ball where you have done so. As far as equipment is concerned, I had an opportunity to go through the yard probably a year ago, and I made a very bold statement to somebody saying that I've seen better vehicles in Cody's junkyard in Leominster. Do you have any plans to request a capital equipment budget to replenish what you have over there?
That's something we should do, yes.
I think it's been some time now since we have had a capital equipment loan order. I'm not talking about a capital equipment loan order for police cruisers for 7 years, and the cars are gone after the loan is paid off. But I believe that we should do something about that, and I think the mayor probably has plans, since she did appoint a capital improvements commission, and I would hope that you would have some correspondence with them so that we can get things back on track with the equipment that we have over there. Additionally, I don't see how you can accept other vehicles over there, given the condition of what you have now. I'm sorry to disagree with my colleague, but maybe we need to, away from the Public Works Department for a moment, maybe we need to outsource some of our police vehicle repairs rather than do them in-house. I'm wondering if you could clarify something for me that was brought up this evening, and that was the patching of potholes. It is my understanding, and this happened before you arrived on the scene, that someone basically screwed up with that asphalt machine. I was told by more than one person that they left the asphalt in there and it all hardened, and they couldn't use that machine. Is that correct?
I've heard that it happened, but they did remove it, but I don't know any of the details of that incident.
Well, that was a very expensive piece of equipment that had to be purchased by the city. And I would suggest that whomever was in charge of the street department over there, if that happened, I would hope at the time that some disciplinary action would have been taken, but apparently it wasn't. That's my understanding. It may not be true, but here we went out to buy a machine that we really needed. We had to have it, and it was hardly ever used. One final question. How many outside contractors did you say that you hire during the winter for plowing?
About 40.
And who supervises those outside contractors?
The superintendent of streets.
Do you believe that the superintendent of streets can handle 40 contractors during a snowstorm?
It's a big load. I mean, ideally, we'd have somebody, checking all their work and making sure that everything is done. It's difficult for one person to do. They do work with our crews, so our crews do what they can to make sure that everything gets done.
Do you think when we go out for bid and that we require that these outside contractors have GPS in their trucks?
Yeah, that's something, I know other communities do that.
I would suggest that maybe we take a look at it. Thank you.
Councilor Di Natale.
Thank you. I appreciate the comments that were made. And Councilor Joseph, your comments, I know where you're coming from. I don't necessarily disagree with what you said. I'm just trying to put out different scenarios and alternatives here. I'm not trying to ruffle feathers, and I do not enjoy talking about cutting a position because in the public sector, it always gets thrown into personalities. I can't speak for a fellow councilor who has a different take. My decision to make the recommendation is based on organizational structure and the confidence that the work can still get done because no one's been able to prove to me otherwise. As to the savings, you're absolutely right. We're not going to save the full amount that we cut because there's going to be some overtime spent, but not $68,000 worth. I look at the auditor, and he does 50,000 things with no assistant. I look at the purchasing agent, who has no assistant. We have an IT department that's not going to have a manager anymore. We have 50 officers at the end of this year, one captain for 50 officers. And yet somehow, the fire department, the police department, purchasing, auditing, they all survive the year. no chaos ensues, because they're really hard workers, and they get the job done under the most strenuous of times. Where I used to work, we had a manager who reported to 3 different entities because there was no director anymore. And he still got the job done as tough as it was. So the way I look at the DPW, you've got a president who's the commissioner, you've got a senior vice president who's the superintendent of the streets, and you've got 7 VPs. And in the private sector, if we got rid of the senior VP, I am of the opinion that the 7 VPs, one of them would be an acting, or one of them would take on more responsibility, or 2 or 3 would. It's just an option that I'm asking everybody to consider, and for the department head and the mayor to look at. There will be savings, not the full amount. But I look at all the other departments in the city who are doing a lot more with less, and they don't have a lot of administrators. I consider the superintendent of streets position to be roughly administration, because as the commissioner stated, the position does not require them to be on the ground physically doing the work. They're supervising. So it's tough for me to make these recommendations because everyone gets nervous and starts going, what's he talking about? Has it ever been looked at? Has it ever been implemented? We always hear, we can't do this, we can't do that, and then when we end up doing it, we end the year fine. So the fire department's working with 4 deputies instead of 6. The fire chief said that that's terrible, but he still survived. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. It's a suggestion. And I'm not disputing with what Councilor Joseph said. He's a manager. I'm not disputing that. But I've seen organizational changes all the time in my own work career life. People take on more responsibilities, and it's up to the department heads and the executive manager to determine how that's going to work out if this were to be implemented. It's about the position. And I had these thoughts last year, but I didn't say anything. But this year I'm saying it, because we're $6 million in the hole. So it's just an idea, and it's rooted in the fact that I have the confidence in everyone else that we can get through the year if we were to implement this without major problems or problems, because it's happened in other areas. As to the police cruiser issue, I believe the mechanic services need to be consolidated like dispatching is. We have 5 mechanics. And my recommendation is not to insinuate that the police mechanic doesn't do anything and the DPW mechanics don't do enough, so they should have more responsibility. My position is major and medium repair work on cruisers get shipped out to Marlboro. So the chains, tires, oil changes, I don't see why that can't get done either. Yes, I'm asking people to do more with less. It's not a radical concept in this city. And the commissioner's an expert, he's disagreeing, that's fine. I mean, it's on the table. Doesn't mean it's going to get done. But I've heard too often in my 1.5 years being here that we can't survive without this and we can't survive without that, and we end up surviving just fine. The facts are the facts. And as to reducing money, as I said before, we need a certain amount every year for free cash. If you add up all the cuts that are on the list right now, including those 2 positions, if they were to go through, it doesn't even come to $300,000. 0.002% of the whole budget is going to kill this whole budget if we cut it and spend it. Before, we would spend money available because we could. This year, we have police and fire that are beyond the breaking point, well beyond it. So spending wisely in this scenario is the case. So again, they're alternatives, because I don't want to sit through these meetings every year and see what we're presented with, and that's what we're going to go with. Thank you.
President Hay.
Thank you, Councilor Clark. I'm hearing a couple of different things here regarding the superintendent's position. I tend to agree with Counselor Joseph regarding needing somebody for the volume of work and the amount of money that's spent in these departments under Mr. Laxo for him to have supervisors underneath him. I am glad to hear Counselor Di Natale speak of confidence and of trying things, and this is something on the table, and I don't disagree with that. Councilor Di Natale's made many recommendations already during this process, as Councilor Joseph had alluded to, of cutting amounts in budgets that has been left over on a regular basis. I think that some of his recommendations have merit, and when we get to the end of this process, I will certainly give them all due consideration and see if we can save some money, which we hope that the mayor will allocate to public, at least I hope the mayor will allocate to public safety. I think his intentions are good, and that we should pay attention and listen to that. In regards to the superintendent's position, there are two things here. One is, I don't think it's this body's responsibility regarding the individuals who fill the positions. That is Mr. Laxo's responsibility, and that is the mayor's responsibility regarding their job performance and their abilities to do the job that is before them. The other piece is that Councilor Di Natale talks about having confidence in people, and I do have confidence that people would get the job done, because most of the people who work for this city, whether it be the police, fire, DPW, planning, auditor's office, any of them, city clerk's office, work very hard and are very diligent and will do what is necessary to accomplish their task. But I think if we're going to talk about confidence, we need to have confidence in Mr. Laxo and in the mayor, in the budget that they submitted to us regarding the personnel in their departments. Every department here has been chopped. Every manager was told, this is the amount of money you're going to get this year, which was drastically reduced from the year before. Each one of them made difficult decisions as to how they were going to make those cuts. And I have confidence in Mr. Laxo that he is making wise decisions for his department so that he has the personnel and the supervisors in order to best serve the residents of Fitchburg. I think it's a slippery slope when this body starts micromanaging the budgets for those departments as to which personnel and which positions they should keep. I think I would no sooner tell Chief Roy, Chief DeMora, Mr. Dotney, any of them, which positions. They're given an amount by the mayor that they're allocated, and they make that determination. And I think we have to trust their judgment regarding that. Thank you.
Councilor DiMartino.
Councillor Stephen Hayes said most of what I was going to say.
Sorry about that, Councilor.
But if somebody is not doing their job, that's your responsibility, and then you bring it to the mayor. And then the mayor deals with it. We do not micromanage your department because we're a policy-making board. That's our job. We're only here to vote on the budget. We vote it up or we vote it down. We cannot fire anybody or we cannot hire anybody. They talk about the police is past their breaking, the fire is past their breaking, but your department has been past their breaking point for the past 10 years. So when we're doing this, and if there is a personality issue going on, that should be dealt with outside this chambers, and it should be dealt with in the proper manner. These are difficult times, and it's very difficult for us to pick one over the other. But if that position was not necessary, you wouldn't have put it in your budget, because we have to rely on you as making the right decision. We also have to rely on you to make sure that every person in your department is multitasked and they're able to do things that when somebody is not in, and I know you're working on that. But the person they're speaking about here tonight is not here to defend himself. And I find it in bad taste to discuss somebody's job when they're not in the room or when they haven't been notified that there might be a decision made. I also understand Councillor Di Natale's point of view, because he's looking at it from a business point of view, and he's got a lot of good points. And I also do have believe there's some merit in the mechanics going over to your department, especially when we're hiring them out into another area. So there's a lot of good here. So I would like all of us to respect each other, but don't go after the juggler for any one person's job, because it's not fair to anybody. A lot of people are getting fired that shouldn't be fired, and a lot of it is political. And let's not bring this one into a political arena. Thank you very much.
Councillor Starr.
Thank you. I don't disagree with Councillor DiMartino or Councillor Hay or the comments made by Councillor Joseph. I do agree 100% with what Councillor Di Natale brought up. This probably isn't the best forum to bring up those types of issues. It's something that's been sitting with me for a while, and I've had other reasons for those particular statements. Now, I would like to get off that topic. How are we doing as far as the street sweeping schedule that was set forth that's on the website?
We're running behind.
How bad?
Well, they're out sweeping streets in the ward, in the wards now, but they're probably, 3 or 4 weeks behind the original schedule.
Okay. The reason I asked is I just wanted to be able to tell constituents, give them a rough estimate. And chances are, we're dealing with 2 old street sweepers that they could break down again. Is that something that's been going on consistently, or?
It's a combination of just shortage of manpower and occasional equipment breakdowns.
Okay. I would like to thank you, though, for the tree removal policy that you sent forth to us. That's very helpful. Not to mention putting stuff like this, and I know Mr. Munier did it last year, in regards to policies behind plowing and also schedules. And it's nice to be able to direct people to the city's website in order to find those particular things. And I'm just really happy being able to drop an email one morning, and then about a pothole, and that afternoon it's already taken care of. So I think you're doing a fantastic job. I think the people that you have working for you do a great work. And Councilor DiMartino's been your biggest advocate. You have been doing more with less, and just keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Tran.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. President Hay and Councilor DiMartino are correct. We are here not to micromanage personnel. We're a legislative body, and that's what we do. We look at policies, we pass policies. Although my background is in business management in the private sector, and I would love to give recommendations on how to run departments and personnel, but if you look at all my questions, all my comments, I have never once made such recommendations. My questions to you tonight were very relevant to budget session. They would consist of asking the efficiency of the department and how things were run. I never once suggest to you on how to run the department and what kind of personnel you need. So when a counselor criticizes another counselor for asking or asking questions and making recommendations on the budget to the mayor, when a counselor call other counselors and use the word, quote, witch hunt, unquote, when we question about the budget, the whole form of check and balance government has failed. We might as well not do anything with this budget, we might as well hand it to the mayor and say, here, Mayor, go do whatever you want. Because quite frankly, that is the whole reason why we're in the mess we're in now. That is the reason why some councilors in this chamber consistently put the budget under scrutiny. And we need to do that, because that is our responsibility. And as a check and balance form of government, we have to do that. But to say that just because we're questioning the budget and we're making recommendations, and, you know, I admire what Councilor Di Natale said, as well as what Councilor Starr said, you cannot use the word witch hunt, because that's really, that really demoralizing to other councilors. Thank you.
Councilor Caddy.
My first question will piggyback on Councilor Starr's. The Long Show's going to be here in about a week and a half. Are we good with the bike route? Is the roads going to be swept in time? Are the potholes going to be filled? Things like that. Are we communicating with Ed Collier from the Long Show race? I understand that they had to change one of their races this year, or one of their heats, into Westminster, because one of the roads they were using isn't good enough for them to use. What's your take on all this?
Yeah, we're aware of the two races that will be held in Fitchburg, and we're patching the potholes, and we'll have the streets swept. The race that is being moved elsewhere is the one that went up Ringe Road, and Ringe Road is definitely in bad shape, so I don't blame them for not wanting to race there. But, you know, we'll make sure that we get the rest of it taken care of.
I'm just hoping that in the future we don't lose this in our city. It just seems such an important event for 50 years that I don't like to see anything leave our city, and I'm disappointed that they had to take one of the heats to Westminster. The next thing I want to talk about, I don't want to breach the subject, but Councilor Joseph runs a restaurant. When I was a young man, I ran a very large restaurant. I don't usually talk about it, but I was in my early 20s, and I had about 70 employees that worked under me. I ran a kitchen, a bakery. I had 22 dishwashers working in one department. And I can remember when I got the job, I wasn't professionally trained, but I grew up in the restaurants, and for some reason the owner of the restaurant wanted me to be the executive chef and run the restaurant. And on Mondays, the guy was a son of a gun. On Mondays, I'd spent the whole day in the office with him for 8 hours, and he pounded the business into me. And I would have to make out the schedules, the menus, the party loads, and I'd have to do the budget every week. Every week I'd hand him my figures, and every week I'd get it back with knock off 3%, knock off 5%. Well, I'd have to do it. He was my boss, but if you knock off 5%, and I guessed wrong, or in the restaurant business, you never know when there's going to be a restaurant emergency, I would go from working 40 hours a week to 80 hours a week. On any one given day, I could be there for 14 to 16 hours. And the birthday party or the dinner I was supposed to go out to, I never made it to. So I want to agree with some of the other councilors in this room. Very unfair to put you in that position. We take away one of your supervisors and tell you you're going to do the job. You're going to go from working 50 hours a week to 80 hours a week. And I don't think you're going to, I hope you wouldn't put up with that. It's not fair. You have two supervisors in this room that are running water and wastewater. Are we going to tell you next year that we're going to get rid of one of them and now you're going to be in charge of that? It can't happen. There has to be a person in charge. He's the superintendent of streets. He has a lot of responsibilities. I think we all know that. but I think it's very unfair to remove that position and put the burden on you, because you're running the big budget. You're running, I know your duties involve everything with that budget. And if we take your eye off the ball, shame on us. I mean, wouldn't be good. So I'll just leave it like that. Thank you.
Any other questions for the commissioner? Lenny, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. President, do you want to come back? Sure. Next, we'll have the Water Enterprise Division. That is page 44. Total $5,438,998. Labor, water, personal services, $959,788. Expense, water expenses, $936,500. Expense, regional water treatment facility expense, $720,000. Expense water reimbursements to the city, $700,000. Expense water debt service, $1,815,710. Expense water capital expenditures, $307,000. Good evening, Dennis.
Good evening. Good evening, councilors. The mission of the Division of Water Supply is to deliver quality potable water to our customers that meets or exceeds the federal and state drinking water standards, and also to provide fire protection for this city 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We are committed to diligently maintaining the treatment and distribution systems, protecting the watershed land surrounding our water sources, in a timely response to customer needs and concerns. The Water Division is responsible for the day-to-day operation and maintenance of 2 state-of-the-art water treatment facilities, multiple storage and pumping facilities, 188 miles of water main, 1,800 fire hydrants, 6 active reservoirs, and thousands of acres of watershed land. The drinking water is tested multiple thousands of times a year to maintain quality. On an annual basis, over 1 billion gallons of water is treated, utilizing chemical precipitation, filtration, clarification, pH adjustment, disinfection. The distribution system personnel are responsible for maintaining all water mains and service piping, leak detection, 24-hour emergency response, construction management, cross-connection inspection and enforcement, meter reading and daily customer service. Engineering department provides record-keeping, plan updates, project planning, design, inspections, and management. The office staff is responsible for water and sewer billing to 11,000 customers, record-keeping, payroll, accounts payable and receivable, and handling over 7,000 customer service calls per year. Just like to take a minute to bring your attention to a couple of areas in this year's budget. Under personal services, I'm recommending the combining of the hydraulic engineer with the water system manager's position. I'm recommending the elimination of 1 meter reader position, and I'm recommending that 1 primary operator position that is currently vacant due to a retirement be left unfilled for this year. The results of these recommendations will result in 3 fewer funded positions for fiscal year 2010 compared to the current fiscal year, and a savings of $139,000. The proposed salary and wage rates for all union and association member employees in this year's budget you have before you, they do not reflect any reduction that are the subject of ongoing negotiations. On the expense side, I have one item in particular on the expenses. You have a $150,000 expense for watershed land purchase. I am asking that line item be removed from the budget tonight, because that was the money that this body approved a few weeks ago for the conservation restriction
purchase up in Ashby and Ashburnham. We've been informed by the Department of Revenue that the revenue we will receive from the watershed conservation restriction we're selling to Fish and Game, that revenue, and then this distribution of that revenue should be a separate item in an escrow account, restricted and not part of the budget. And in addition, all of those, both the revenue from this land that we're selling, or the conservation restriction we're selling, and the land we're purchasing, should be completed by the end of this fiscal year, by the end of the month. We just had some very good news that the final figure is going to be $954,000 of the conservation restriction being sold to Fish and Wildlife should be available within the next week or week and a half. So with the removal of that $150,000 from the expense side, the remaining expenses for fiscal year 2010 amount to $57,500 less than what was approved in fiscal year 09. On capital expenses, I am requesting $285,000 to cover two major expenses that are vital to the department and the city. The first is $185,000 to cover DEP-mandated Phase 1 and Phase 2 analysis of city dams. There's over 15 dams in the city. And I'm also requesting $100,000 to cover borrowing associated with an essential $1.1 million upgrade and retrofit to our regional water treatment facility, which has some major problems with their clarifier and filtration system. So, that plant is approaching 10 years old, and the existing system needs a major upgrade to the tune of just over $1 million. These projected capital costs, as well as a previous capital cost and debt service, combined with a flat revenue base, has made it necessary to request a water rate increase, which you have received as your package last Friday. And I'm sure we will be discussing that further. One last thing I want to mention is that in an effort to bring in as much revenue as we can, to try to balance the budget and come as close as we can, we've made a diligent effort over the last 2 months to collect late invoices for water and sewer billing. And through the efforts of our clerical departments, both in water and wastewater, they've made phone calls, sent out late notices, and in that 8 weeks, we've collected over $174,000 that have been turned in to the Treasurer's Department from late bills.
Questions for the Deputy Commissioner? Councilor Di Natale.
Thank you. Mr. Munier, on the issue of revenue with regard to water supply and selling our city water, I've been bringing this up since last year, and I keep hearing that negotiations are ongoing, but, I mean, I consider our water supply to be an economic gold mine, because a lot of communities would kill to have even half of what we have. I know there are other communities that have shortages. I know there are even businesses in Massachusetts or New Hampshire that are looking for water supply. I've read it in the news. Are we being diligent, or I shouldn't say are we? I guess my question is, what is the plan going forward with getting, I just see this as a multi-million-dollar revenue gold mine if we really were pursuing, or we continue to pursue this avenue, but I haven't seen anything come to fruition yet. What's going on with this?
Most of the discussions in the past and even currently have been talked about neighboring cities and towns needing more water and be able to get that water there. You're absolutely correct. The water is a gold mine. We have a plentiful supply compared to many towns and cities. One of the issues is getting that water there. It's like you had an oil well, you've got to run the pipe to get it there. That's a very expensive proposition. The neighboring cities and towns are certainly feasible. They have to want to buy our water. So far, they've indicated there's been talk about maybe we want some in the future. We're not ready right now, and that's where we stand. We are speaking with Lunenburg. Currently, there's the Tri-Town project that we will be supplying water and sewer service to. That's probably the most immediate prospect of selling a little bit more water. I've received phone calls from a particular industry that was looking at the old chem design facility that was looking at the city. I don't know where that stands, if they're still interested. They potentially would have use for 100,000 gallons a day of water. I called that individual back numerous times, indicating that we're ready, willing, and able to serve both with water and wastewater, and whatever we could do to help them bring that industry into chem design I'd be glad to do it. Glad to help.
Could you estimate ballpark what we could bring in per gallon? For example, the chem lab, if we were to do 100,000 gallons, what would that ballpark bring in?
Current rate, again, as the rate stands now, it's $2.56 per 750 gallons. So I don't have a calculator with me, but 100,000 gallons a day at $2.56 per 750 gallons.
It's like $300
a day.
Yeah.
Times 365 days a year. Again, we're continuing to leave the channels open to Leominster, to Lunenburg, to Westminster. We do sell water, and I think most of you are aware, to Westminster and to Lunenburg. Westminster is a large customer, Lunenburg a smaller customer, but we do sell them water on a daily basis.
Do you know how these cities and towns are getting through the year with such low supplies? I mean, I feel like that they would have no choice sometimes but to seek out a place like ours for extra water. I mean...
Well, each town and city is unique. And as I'm sure you've read in the paper, Leominster has been forced by DEP to build their own filtration plant. The discussions about selling Leominster water were mostly had to do with looking into the future, and they were on a growth spurt where they thought they would probably be running out of water. The economy has certainly put a damper on some of those projections. I think in the future that will reoccur, and they will need extra water. We've had discussions about running water through Leominster all the way to Devens, and the development at Devens site, that how could we work with Leominster to supply water that would pass through Leominster and then get to Devens. Again, those are things in the future. I don't see that happening in the immediate 1, 2, 3 years, but we're certainly open to all those things.
And my last question regarding capital infrastructure, will there, aside from the 285, is there anything long-term that you'll be looking to get that's a lot more than that? I mean, is there any big projects?
I think, Councilor, and I have it here, but in my package that I got to all the councilors on Friday, had a 5-year projection on capital needs.
Right.
Both, and I would emphasize, over the last 4 years, we have spent over $4 million on capital needs, and I think that was a very wise thing to do. We have replaced major water mains. We have rehabilitated one major dam. We have rebuilt a pump station, Oak Hill Pump Station. And we were able to do that because the water department was an enterprise fund, it had some funds. We need to continue on that track to keep doing as much as we can every year proactively to replace water mains, to keep our facilities maintained, and in that 5-year plan I've outlined some dollar figures to do that.
Thank you.
Councilor DiMartino.
If this council chooses not to give you the water increase rate that you have applied for, have you made provisions within your budget to work that out?
We can get through fiscal year 2010 without going into a deficit by using the remaining retained earnings that we have within the department. Going beyond fiscal 2010, we will rapidly go into a deficit, and within 3 or 4 years could be in the millions of dollars in deficit if we continue to do the things we need to do to maintain the water system. If that was not to occur, we would have to look at cutting back on capital projects, on replacing water mains, on maintaining our system, on maintaining the plants.
We give $700,000 a year to the city, back to the city for services. That would have to be up for debate. So those are the kind of things we would have to look at.
How much money do you have in your account right now?
We should end the year at approximately $850,000 in retained earnings at the end of the fiscal year.
In the black?
In the black.
Okay.
I mean, I should clarify that the retained earnings have been going down steadily. They were at $6 million at one point. They're down to $850,000. We have used a good portion of that, again, through 4 good projects, needed projects. We haven't borrowed the money, but we have exceeded our revenue for the last 4 to 5 years and been dipped into those retained earnings. So we can't keep doing that on this.
Can you explain to me the 178,000 that you regrouped? How did you regroup that? You said that they were on the phone and getting...
Okay. We got a report, we can download a report on delinquent payments. It's a multiple-page report. Again, the 2 secretaries, clerical personnel in the 2 departments took that report and just started making phone calls and asking people and reminding people that they were late on their payments and that could they help us out, give us half, make a payment. That was, in most cases, 90% of the people we talked to were very cordial and said they could do what they could. But we did remind them that this was a courtesy call, that this would be followed up by a late notice, and then following a late notice, potentially a shut-off notice if you didn't pay your bill. And just within the last 2 weeks, we did send out those late notices. Again, not shut-off notices, but again, just a formal notice that you are delinquent in your bill, and please make a payment. And that's resulted in the $174,000.
First of all, I congratulate those 2 great workers, but should that not be a practice year-round, not just now?
I agree, Councillor.
Should that not have been a practice in the past 10 years?
I agree. We probably should have been more diligent, and that's the policy we've put in place. Commissioner Jordan and myself are committed to following up on this, and we have to shut people off.
So there's something good came out of the recession. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Councilor Joseph.
My question was answered. Thank you.
Dennis, if I could just ask you a question here. At the beginning of your opening remarks, you talked about a $150,000. If on page 46 of the budget, you can see that on line 45594, we've gone up 2,900%. Last year, the figure there for watershed land purchase was $5,000. This year, it is $150,000. I just wanted to check that, and if you could explain that a little more.
That's the comment I made. Again, just to back up a little, we have 2 conservation restriction processes going on as we speak. In one case, we are selling a conservation restriction on city-owned watershed land, approximately, as it's turned out, about approximately a little over 1,800 acres, that we are selling a conservation restriction to the Division of Fish and Wildlife, and in return for that, allowing public access to our watershed land for passive recreation, the state is, through the Fish and Wildlife, are going to pay us $954,000. Again, that should be completed within the next week or week and a half. We should receive that check. A separate conservation restriction that we're buying on 2 parcels of land totaling approximately 172 acres in just over the line in Ashby and Ashburnham would add to our watershed land and protect our water sources and help to protect our water sources. We received 2 DEP grants. The cost of that purchase is about $850,000. We received 2 DEP grants for $450,000 of that. We received another grant through an Open Space Institute grant for $285,000, and the balance from the city side is $150,000, which we spoke about a few weeks ago in this chamber. And that's the $150,000 I had indicated initially in my expenses. We've looked at that, and that's really not the proper place for it. It's a separate escrow. Both things are separate. Mr. Saracen talked with the Department of Revenue and said that's sort of like an escrow account. The $954 coming in, restricted to, half of that restricted to new land purchases. The other half is going to be up to this body to decide where it goes. And then the remaining balance in there would stay in that escrow account for future land purchases when we thought we had a good situation where we could acquire additional watershed lands. So, I don't know if that answers, does that answer your question?
Dick, do you have anything to add to that?
No, so just to be sure, the intent, as Dennison is requesting, is that the council do reduce that line by $150,000. So that would be one of the cuts.
We want to put that on the list, then, I think.
Thank you. Any other questions for the Deputy Commissioner?
No.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you.
Finally, we go to page 47, wastewater overview. Total, $9,684,968. Labor, wastewater personal services, $1,811,057. Wastewater treatment facility, $3,878,050. Wastewater treatment facility reimbursement, $850,000. Wastewater treatment facility capital debt service, $2,903,861. And finally, wastewater treatment facility capital expenditures, $242,000. Good evening, Joe.
Good evening, councilors. A little statement also I'd like to make. The wastewater department is tasked with treating the city's wastewater to a level that meets or exceeds stringent standards set by Mass DEP and the US EPA. It's also responsible for the operation and maintenance of 220 miles of sewer lines that make up the collection system. The department accepts flow not only from the Fitchburg residents and businesses, but also serves the needs of the neighboring communities of Lunenburg and Westminster. In addition to treating wastewater, the department also provides several area communities with sludge and sewage disposal services to ensure a safe and reliable disposal method for these wastes, all the while generating revenues with help and offsetting costs to residents. I would like also to give a brief recap of where we were a year ago today and bring us up to date. We began fiscal 2009 with a $1.575 million deficit, along with several requirements from Mass DEP to complete major odor control improvements and also to begin construction of a new grit removal facility totaling $12.8 million between the two projects. This is in addition to the ongoing cost of operating and maintaining the two treatment plants. I am pleased to say that through a cooperative effort between this council, the department, with help from the mayor, we have met these goals, and we expect to end up fiscal 2009 in balance. I think that's quite an accomplishment considering where we started. In fiscal 2010, there are still several challenges we will face. The most significant, regrettably, will be the need to close the West Fitchburg treatment plant. This is a result of the unfortunate closing of Monksville Paper, and because of that, it's no longer feasible to keep the plant open. We are currently working with Mass DEP to formulate a plan that will allow us to close up the facility and redirect the two remaining paper mills to the east plant. We expect this to occur by October of this year, and This will have an effect on both the personal services and expenses. Two other challenges that we face in 2010 is we will need to commence with another separation project to separate the sewage system from the storm system, and also to make some substantial changes down at the East Treatment Plant. Both of these are major steps towards complying with EPA and DEP requirements. With this in mind, I'd like to highlight just a couple key areas of the budget that will be affected in 2010. As I said, personnel, there will be 5 positions that will be affected with the closing of the West Plant. Of these, we expect to lose 2 through attrition, and the remaining 3, I am requesting that these individuals be retained to establish a collections crew that was previously mentioned by Commissioner Laxo. The result of this is there'll be no added cost from fiscal 2009 to fiscal 2010 for personal services. And I'd also like to note that this includes contractual steps and COLA increases, but does not include any reductions that may occur as a result of the mayor's ongoing negotiations with the unions. These individuals will be responsible for operating and maintaining the sewer system. This was work previously performed by DPW crews. With the establishment of the enterprise and in accordance with an ordinance passed in 2008, the responsibility of the system was transferred to the wastewater department. By creating this dedicated crew, the city will be able to now take a proactive approach in managing the system. It will also provide the resources needed to comply with other requirements of our current permit and with new federal CMOM regulations. CMOM is Capacity Management, Operation, and Maintenance, and it's a whole new program being instituted by EPA to take a proactive stance to a lot of aging collection systems. And for expenses, there will be a slight decline between 2009 and 2010. The West Plant expenses will be reduced by $666,000. However, on the other side, the East Plant will increase by about $313,000, or we'll have a reduction of about $353,000. The main increase in the East Plant expenses are for natural gas. The rates went up. Electricity, with the new equipment coming online, we're going to have some significant new demands. And also with the grit facility coming online, our disposal rates are going to jump significantly. The debt service will increase by $336,000 in 2010, and that essentially is the increased loans for the grit facility. Capital projects, I'm also requesting an increase of $142,000 over fiscal '09, and that is to really try to become more aggressive and complete and badly needed maintenance issues at the plant. Thank you.
President Hay.
Thank you. Touched on it, the very last thing you talked about, Joe, was the East Plant capital improvements. Do we have a long-term of 3 or 4 or 5-year plan? I mean, that facility has been beat up for a number of years, and
we have a plan that extends out 3 years. We have a tentative plan that goes 5 years, realizing that things are constantly changing down there. You know, we do the best we can, but as new problems occur, we sometimes will have to shift our priorities from one area to another. But there is a 5-year plan to replace a lot of the aging equipment.
Thank you.
Councilor Caddy.
What's the future? What's the future going to be with the West Plant? If you close it down by October, are you going to decommission it? Are you going to remove equipment? Are we going to keep the property? Are we going to sell the property? Are we going to let it overgrow and be an eyesore coming into that side of the city?
The plan right now is to utilize the West Plant as a pump station, if you will. We've worked rather at length with the mills and with DEP was still negotiating, but the plant would be converted initially to a pump station, so the mills would still discharge to the plant, and then we would make some minor modifications to get that flow down east. It would be a very controlled. Because of that, the plant would be maintained, lawns would be mowed. In the immediate future, DEP wants to see some assurances that when we ship the west plant flows down there, it won't have a negative impact on the east plant, which we don't believe it will. Long-term would be right now to maintain the permit and hold on to the plant. Under the presumption that everything will go smoothly with DEP and with the transfer of flows, there are some thoughts as to other processes that could be utilized at the west plant, which I think could generate some good revenue for the department.
Will there still be personnel if you're using that as a pumping station? Will there still be personnel there?
No, it will not be maintained full-time, but it will be checked on daily by this new collections crew that I'm proposing.
Recently, about a month and a half ago, I called and there was an odor. It happens often, but this particular day that I called, I was driving by, I pretty much got sick to my stomach. It was the worst I've ever felt. I think we had a conversation about, the personnel that works there. If it turned out not to be us, it turned out to be Newark.
Yes.
Had a problem. They didn't notify you, and we had a conversation about the people working there, when they come in to work, and they can obviously smell that to notify someone, but that would be my worry if you're not going to have anybody there. What's Newark going to do? They were completely responsible for this, and I think after a couple phone calls, I think you got involved, and they rectified it within a 24-hour period, but that's my worry as a ward councilor up there. It was disgusting, and it happens too often, and I think, didn't Leominster sue us over a situation like that several years ago?
Over
a smell at our east plant?
There were issues with odors at the east plant, yes, and the odors were generated at the east plant. And I'm sure, Councilor, as you're aware, we spent millions of dollars since the late 1990s doing many upgrades, the last of which are just being completed. The west plant will be checked on a daily basis, Monday through Friday, as part of the collection crew duties. The weekends, I admit, there'll be no one checking on the plant. However, I think the odors that do develop up there, when they do occur, they are significant. I give you that, but we are working with Newark to have them keep on top of that. It's a treatment process at the mill.
Can it be metered? Is there a metering system? What's the smell? What is the smell?
What this last time is they have an aerobic process, which means their wastewater is first pre-treated. And it goes through a process similar to the east plant. What happened was they lost their aeration, so essentially all the bacteria in one of the tanks died. And when they stirred it up, it's just basic septic material that gets churned around and it released hydrogen sulfide. And that was that rotten egg smell that was very prevalent.
Can it be metered? So if you're not there, an alarm goes off?
The odor?
It's aluminum sulfate?
No. No. Hydrogen sulfide.
Hydrogen sulfide.
Yes, gas. And this is something that Newark can meter to ensure that their blowers are constantly working, and if their system's running properly, those odors will not occur. As to set some kind of a meter up, I'm not sure that we would really get accurate readings. It really has to do a lot with the wind currents, and I can tell you I personally went up that day, and down in the driveway at the west plant, it wasn't as obvious as it was up on the street. So I'm not sure that any type of metering at the plant would give us the information we're looking for.
I just got to say, that's going to be my biggest worry if you take personnel out of that plant. I bet you at least a dozen times in the last year this has happened, at least.
Again, they'll be checking it daily.
All right. Thank you.
Councilor Starr.
Thank you. I'm talking about the grip facility, Joe, and first of all, when's that going to be completed? What's the status?
We're mandated to have it done by the end of October, and we hope to have it online by the end of end of August, early September.
Oh, okay, so it's actually a little ahead of schedule?
At this point.
Okay. What would the disposal, now, with that, I heard you mention disposal increases? What does that mean?
The grit that we would be taking out of the wastewater flow that comes in, right now, that just passes in. A lot of that goes to the incinerator, and some of it stays in the basin, some of it gets distributed throughout the entire facility. Once this goes online, we will be much more efficient in taking the grit out of the wastewater, which is, grit is a key problem to the entire plant. It often causes systems to fail. And the disposal cost will be the cost to take this grit, this sand, if you will, that settles out, and dispose of it up at the landfill.
Okay, so that's where, in the past, then, it would just basically have gone through the process, gone into
various tanks. I'm sure that, we look at our tanks, there'll be some in the system, some gets processed through with the sludge. It's everywhere. And with these, with the new facility, the goal is to remove all the grit from the system.
Okay. And hence the reason state mandated it about a year or so ago for.
Yes.
Now, I brought the sludge. Are we still making good money on that?
Yes, we're still making money on sludge. We're constantly looking at the profit we make off it. When we look at profits, we include the cost to burn our own sludge with those profits, but it is still a profitable market.
And we're still one of, in this area?
There are,
These that truck it in?
say, a half a dozen communities that have incinerators that burn. Our closest neighbor would be Worcester, the Upper Blackstone, and then in northern Rhode Island, Connecticut, there's a few more facilities.
All right. Now, getting back to the burning and the incinerator, you have a yearly $1.2 million electricity bill. I think I brought this up last year with the incinerator, and has there been any thought put into utilizing some type of alternative energy resource for that facility, maybe some type of turbine running off of the heat that's created by the incinerator, just basically making it self-contained, fully functioning, so you don't have this humongous bill? I mean, $100,000 a month is a pretty steep electricity bill. I know there's a lot of stuff going on down there.
Right, the incinerator,
just with the, I know it gets up to well over 1,000 degrees in some sections of it.
that's gas cost, that's not electric.
Okay, but
a big part of the electric is with the a lot of the pumps at the plant, with the aeration blowers at the plant, and that's really where the majority of the electricity is used. The burning process is all gas.
is there any way that is any looking into, I mean, utilizing alternative energy, some type of maybe a steam turbine with the heat that's generated from that gas?
We did look into that a couple years ago. We did get a couple proposals that just didn't seem viable for us. At this point in time, I am hesitant to move forward. one of the ideas that we have for the west plant would be to convert that to a sludge burning facility. I think that could be retrofitted to accept cake and sludge in a solid versus liquid form. And I think if we could do that, the markets would be blown wide open for us.
So it's a potential revenue that the city so desperately is always looking for?
That the department is so desperately looking for, yes. And, you know, that's one idea. Obviously, it would have to be approved by Mass DEP, but there are options for the west plant, and the incinerator right now at the east plant needs extensive upgrades, and the thought is, instead of putting a lot of good money after bad, maybe we should consider replacing it with a newer technology and something that we could expand our markets with.
Okay, sounds good, thank you.
Councilor Joseph.
Joe, I guess my concern this year is probably similar to past years. Your expenditures for the year is $9,684,900, blah, blah. And your revenues is $9,684,968. I thought, right now, your revenues is exactly what your expenditures are. I thought we were at a point this year where we would get some retained earnings in wastewater. And how confident are we with the revenues that we're not going to run into the same problems we've had in the past?
The revenues, I'm very confident. We are really zeroing in. I've been doing a lot of adjustments with the user portion of the revenue. That really has probably been the one item that has been most skewed in past years. You know, I've worked extensively with Commissioner Murnia just to, you know, look at, you know, what's being billed out on the water side, and I think the revenues are in line. One thing this year is there are other projects that were expedited at the urging of EPA to help gain compliance quicker than we were moving. And the intent of that is to avoid additional mandates. And so it's, I think the revenues are good, and I originally thought we would have retained earnings, but at this point, I'm not seeing that.
Okay, because I'm just concerned, we brought the rates up fairly substantially last year in order to make sure that you got to where you needed to be for the projects that you had going, and that we needed to cover a budget deficit from previous years because we didn't start the wastewater off quite the way we should have. But I would hope that by now we would be getting a little bit more in retained earnings so that you could do more capital projects.
And I think over the last 6 months that if we have had discussions with EPA, which goes back to 10-year-long negotiations, and they are really pushing us to be a little more aggressive in coming into compliance at the plant. We really have suffered over the last 10 years with compliance issues, and what we're trying to do is, you know, take these funds that we do have, and I want to just say, Council, that if we didn't, I really appreciate this council passing those rates, because we would be even further in debt, and we'd have to go to the city to make up that shortfall. But I'm trying to be very aggressive with getting into compliance and getting things upgraded, improved, so that we will be in a better position to build retain earnings. But unfortunately, for the next couple of years, I still think it's going to be very, very tight.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor DiMartino.
Did you regroup any money that people owed?
That's that $175,000. That is split between water and wastewater. The bills go out as one, and funds come in, I would venture to say it's probably 50/50. Half of that money would be water, half would be wastewater.
So you will continue to be aggressive going after people who don't pay their bills on time?
Yes, and as Commissioner Mernier pointed out, we will move forward to shut people off if that's what it takes.
Thank you.
President Hay.
Just following up on that, Joe, the department a couple of years in a row had some revenue shortfalls because they were projecting at 100% collection. This year's budget, what did you use as a...
We first adjusted down the billable units, and secondly, I budget at 90%. We're going to be close to that. I might still come up a little bit short, but...
It's much more realistic than 100%. And that caused you to get in trouble for a few years, so I'm glad to see you made that change. Thank you.
Councilor Caddy.
Are we going to have to, you were talking about removing the grit and bringing it to the landfill. Are we going to have to pay the landfill to accept that?
Yes.
Is it contaminated material?
No.
Does the city own property that it could go to instead of paying at the landfill?
It's not contaminated landfill, however, it must be disposed of in a lined area. We were disposing of it over at the old site of the old treatment plant over off Airport Road. It's
Filter beds?
Yes.
Yep.
And because that is not a lined site, DEP said that we cannot continue to dispose of it there. It's not considered hazardous, but naturally it comes out of the wastewater. There potentially are some pollutants, but it's not considered hazardous such that we have to dispose of it as a hazardous material, which would be phenomenally expensive.
How is the, at the landfill, how is that lined? Is it plastic?
It's a, I'm not sure exactly what the material is, but it's a plastic rubber type of material, and I actually saw them when they were opening a new cell, and they're just big rolls. They dig the pit, and they just line these rolls out. There's a whole sealant process. I'm not overly familiar with it.
That's what I thought it was. What's the cost going to be at the landfill? Do you know yet?
For the grit?
Yeah.
I budgeted $145,000. I believe that's what it was. Yes, $145,000 is what I budgeted.
Doesn't the city own 25 acres up near the West Treatment Plant, up near Newark? It's the old pulp pits, it's called?
Yeah, that's where we used to dispose of the paper mill sludge, and as you know, we had to discontinue using those because they too are not lined. And the option that we were given was to put a liner in those 5 basins or dispose.
That was my next question. Why couldn't we line?
The cost to install those liners at the time was prohibitive, and it was determined that was more feasible to put in these belt presses, get a better cake.
But now that you have to budget $145,000 per year, wouldn't it make sense to line one of those pits and...
I would venture to say, not knowing, I have no idea what it would cost, but I would venture to say that the life of those pits would be very short, and we'd be spending a lot of money to put these liners in, and we'd be getting a very short life on using them. What we used to do with the other sludges, once it dried up to 20% solids, we used to excavate them and bring them to the landfill for disposal. Ultimately, even those pits went to the landfill.
And you still do bring the sludge to the landfill also?
Yes. The sludge from the west plant and from the east plant, that's ash. And by incinerating it, it's much less weight that you dispose of, and it's based on weight.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Jordan? Joe, thank you.
Thank you, councilors.
Councilors, our final budget meeting will be on Thursday, June 25th at 7. Final review, immediately followed by special city council meeting. Is there anything else councilors have?
Move adjourned.